Good morning. Happy Monday. And welcome to WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Oz Griebel continues to make Connecticut tick. We last sat down with him when he was doing that by running a spirited third-party campaign for governor. Now he's on the hustings of a new campaign. Here's the slogan, folks. Unrig the election system. He wants to change our electoral system as chairman of the Connecticut chapter of SAM, a.k.a. the Serve America Movement. Oz has returned to the WNHA studio. Tell us about that. Thanks for coming in, Oz.
Always a pleasure, Paul. Thanks for having me here.
Always love having you on the air. So, Oz, you're the head of a new party. You're not calling it a third party. That was interesting to me.
Correct.
A new political party, but not third party, seeking to change the electoral system. It's a national party. They're big in New York. They're in all 50 states. It was founded in 2017. You met these folks when you ran for governor in 2018. And basically, let me read you the quote you guys give and tell me what you think. Build a new political party for new American majority that isn't left or right, but about opening political primaries, having ranked choice voting, and term limits. Does that sound right?
That's for Connecticut particularly, absolutely. And just for clarification, in case I misstated something, Paul, the SAM, the Serve America Movement, started in 2016.
Oh, 16. Okay.
So like a lot of parties that are reacting to national elections, their original goal was to have a third party in place for the 2020 presidential election with a candidate. And, everybody goes back and takes a cold shower and realizes how difficult that is. And when you look at things that you know and a number of your listeners know, there really is no national political party. It's 50 state political parties that come together to select their candidates on the presidential side. So the focus they turned quickly to was building parties in states. Started with New York, ran a ticket in 2018. A woman who was the former mayor of Syracuse, former Democrat, along with a gentleman, practicing lawyer in New York, a chief elected official of a Westchester County town. And they earned enough votes in 2018 to actually become a party in New York. I don't know how much of this you followed in New York, but Governor
Cuomo just changed the rules for third parties because he was mad at the working family parties for not supporting him.
Right.
What's that going to mean now for getting a toehold in that state? Are you going to have a hard time getting
on
ballots?
Well, what SAM will do, they're going to challenge that on its for a whole bunch of legal reasons. I believe they'll actually file a lawsuit this week to challenge the validity of the increase in the number of votes you need to keep the third party status. So. I think if anything, the movement in New York, this commission that Governor Cuomo led, just underscores the duopoly that the two parties have, and that they don't want any.
The
real
rules get made by Democrats and Republicans. Right. One of my favorite, that's in quotes, favorite, is in Connecticut. A Democrat and Republican are guaranteed to be register our voters in every town. So when a third party wants to get a register our voters to keep honest the vote counting, let's say in Hartford they had a working families party once,
right?
Then you have to have 3. Because even if nobody votes for the Republican has to have somebody in. So, yeah, they kind of make the rules about who gets on the ballot against them.
Right.
So the word duopoly is well posed. But, Oz, over the years, there have been a lot of efforts to have what you guys are calling yourselves the center. We've talked about that before. You feel that, Mary, you said 41% of the country is in the center on issues ranging from health care to taxes to whether the way you put it was Democrats kind of say, let's have more programs, and the Republicans say, cut government, and it's really more complicated than that. A lot of people try to do this. Ross Perot tried to do that with a third party. In New York, the other third parties cross-endorsed candidates, including in Connecticut, the Working Families Party. We saw how that kind of had a boomerang down them in the New Haven mayoral race. But you're not cross-endorsing, right? You want to run candidates.
Well, the first thing we're trying to do, Paul, is before we jump into actual elections in Connecticut, is to change the system to make it easier for an independent candidate to run, whether it be for the state Senate, the state House, or the constitutional offices. So our focus is on having open public primaries, which are paid for by taxpayers, not by the parties. Establishing ranked choice voting, which is a big movement around different parts of the country. Maine, as you know, has it. Massachusetts has a strong initiative to put it on the ballot in this November. And then looking
there's some cities around, I believe in California.
Right. And New York just in the November 18 election approved ranked choice voting for primaries in the 5 boroughs.
David Leonhardt in the Times op-ed writer just had a argument that that the Democrats would be able to have a presidential candidate more people liked. And let's for a minute on ranked choice, because ranked choice is complicated. Term limits is important. Open primary is important. Let's take them one by one.
Sure.
So you wanted to make 3 big changes in Connecticut in order to make it easier for third-party candidates to run and give you more choice.
Voters more choice, correct.
Okay, so one way you would do that is open primaries. And that means in a primary allowing all voters to vote in one primary. You can't vote in both the Democrat and Republican. The Republican Party, before they lost Lowell Weicker and kind of went all the way right in 1990, I believe, didn't they have an open primary, and then that changed when Tom DeMore and Lowell Weicker left the party?
I don't know the facts, but there was at least a time when the Republican Party was in favor of opening up the primaries to unaffiliated voters. And, Paul, I think the narrow point here, just looking ahead to the April 28th presidential primary, will be urging the 2 parties to open that presidential primary up to all unaffiliated voters. And they're roughly 41, almost 42% of registered voters in the state are registered as unaffiliated.
That's gotten big.
It has gotten big. My memory is that if you go back to 2000, over the last 20 years, that went from about 30% to now over 40+%, which I think is a reflection of where people are. When I use that term "radical middle," it's not. The parties are going to stay in existence, but giving voters more choice. I think the fact that so many people register as unaffiliated indicates their desire not to be bound by one party or another.
And that's up to the parties whether they do that, right? That's not a law.
It's not a law. That's up to the parties. So our petition will be to Nancy Wyman and her colleagues at the Democratic Party, and to J.R. Romano and his colleagues at the Republican Party.
Well, there's not going to be a Republican primary, is there?
I thought in Connecticut, there was. I could be wrong. I thought there was. I don't know if anybody's running, but I thought the primary was still open.
Okay. And so what have they told you so far?
We haven't formally asked, so that's going to start this week, and we'll be getting that. I don't know where I know that my memory is that the Secretary of State, I think Denise Merrill, has been quoted as being in favor of opening the primaries to get voters engaged. I mean, that's part of the process.
And would you let them vote in both?
No, you'd pick one. You'd go into the day. The concept would be to go into the primary into your either when you're seeking an absentee ballot, or on the day of on April 28th. To go in and say, I want to vote in the Republican primary, I want to vote in the Democratic primary, and you pick one.
So one argument against, and I actually personally favor this, but I wanted to give you some of the arguments against it. One is that parties should not let people who aren't in the parties pick their candidates, because then it's not going to be whom they're really for. So that in a general election, you get to weigh in on it, but you could be, for instance, you might have a lot of Trump people who want to have the weakest Democratic candidate, so they'll all sign up unaffiliated to vote in your primary. Any concern about that?
Well, first of all, you can do that today. If you look at the way the Secretary of State's calendar lays out, if you're an unaffiliated voter, and you have been, I think, for the last 90 days, you can register in one of the parties today and vote in that primary. What you can't do is go in the day of the primary.
So this would make it easier for them.
Make it easier. That's what we're talking about doing. And as far as the other point I would make, Paul, which I think gets overlooked in this, primaries are paid for by all taxpayers. They aren't paid for by the Republican Party or the Democratic Party.
Well, maybe they shouldn't be.
Well, then let the parties choose whom they want. But if you're going to have a primary that's paid for by taxpayers, all voters ought to have a chance to participate in that primary.
So why don't we just not have the voters pay for their primaries?
Well, I think primaries are, first of all, the concept. Now, I'll just jump a little bit all over the lot on you here, Paul. But if you do look at what has happened in California, where they went to a single primary and they took the top 2, I think the idea of giving people a chance to participate, the primary is a critical factor to that. If you don't have a primary that's open to people other than in the parties, you're not going to get independents to participate. So to me, a primary is an important aspect of getting broader participation, both in the parties. And then if you go down the road to California, where you have a single primary, they're now looking moving from a top 2 to a top 5 that would be then combined in the general election with ranked choice voting.
Right.
I think that's where a lot of this movement.
And we are going to get the ranked choice in a minute. I'm going to remind people you're talking to Oz Griebel. Remember, Oz was running for governor. Before that, he was a business leader, an association in Hartford. He really shook up the last governor election, and now he's chairing Connecticut SAM, the chapter of the Serve America movement, which is trying to make a third party in the country. And in Connecticut, they're trying to do that first by changing our electoral system through open primaries, ranked choice voting, and term limits. Bob McCormick wrote in, Oz, he said, and thank you, Bob, I voted for you, Oz. So far, how do you think Lamont is doing?
Well, I'm going to let Bob make his own comments on that. I want to stay as focused as I can on what we're about right now rather than getting into the political discussion. There may be a time and a place for that, Paul, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the
So what you made your campaign, you're not going to turn around now and just dump on the guy right away.
We have different points of view. Let's leave it at that.
All right. Thanks, Bob, for the question. So, Oz, let's go to ranked choice voting. Let me just tell me if this is the right way to explain it to people. The ranked choice voting movement says that when you vote, you shouldn't just have to vote for one person. You vote in order for the people you think would be good. So if there are 9 people running in a primary for president for Democrat, or in a mayor in New Haven, let's say there were 4
right
in an election, a primary or general election, you get to put in order. Here's the person I want first. Here's my second choice. Here's my third choice. And then this sounds complicated, but they're actually doing it in Maine. It seems to be working fine.
Correct.
If someone, you go through a first round counting up all the votes. And then if nobody has won 50% of the votes, then they eliminate the bottom vote getter. And then that person, all the people who voted for that person has been eliminated. You see who their second choice was. And then you give those votes to the next person for the tally. In the next round, if you still have nobody getting 50%, then you eliminate the next bottom person. The thinking is that this winner-take-all system often gives us a situation where we're voting for the lesser of two evils. And that with ranked choice, you kind of go for whom you want. You don't feel like you're throwing away your vote. Let's say it's a 3-way governor race like last time. Let's say you kind of like Oz, but you feel like I'm throwing away my vote. You might vote first for Stefanowski or Lamont, and then you put Oz second. And then if there's nobody winning 50%, then they kind of add that all together. So you haven't thrown away your vote, but then if Oz came in third, your vote then goes to the person you want next. And the thinking is, David Leonard argued this in the New York Times, you'll get candidates who appeal to a broader base, and then you'll have better people running.
I think, having Monty Frank and I having run last year, or in 18 rather, the number of people who would come up to us and say, we think you're the best candidate, the best ticket, but if we vote for you, I'm afraid that Ned Lamont will win. Or if I vote for you, I'm afraid that Bob Stefanowski is going to win. Ergo, you're spoilers. And to your point, Paul, we're wasting the vote. Mm-hmm. The idea, I can't say it any better than what you just said. If you think that Oz Griebel and Monty Frank were the best ticket, you could vote for us number one, and then vote for whomever you were concerned about not wanting to be the second choice, or the other way around. This whole concept of getting people to talk more about the issues that are critical to people, to the so-called radical middle, rather than to the bases, I think is critical. And in Maine, it's working in Maine, you may know.
And less negative campaigning, because if
that's
you
the theory,
attack the other candidate, then people who like that candidate too might not vote for you.
Correct. And in Maine, as just a quick footnote to your comment, in 2018, they passed Maine, put ranked choice voting in for their congressional election. In the congressional election in 18, the incumbent was a Republican. There were 4 candidates running. The Republican won about 48% of the vote on election night on the first, your so-called first round. Democrat won 47%. The 2 so-called minor party candidates split the 5%. Because there wasn't somebody with 50% plus 1, they went and did what you just suggested, and the Democrat wound up winning that election as a result of the ranked choice voting. So,
what I wonder what would happen. Let's say 60% want the Democrat or a liberal party, and then 55% want the Republican and a conservative minor party. But the conservative minor party was the 4th out of the 4. Only that candidate's votes would be counted next. Like, in other words, they do one at a time, right?
It's the low when you take and in a sense throw out the person's votes.
Yeah, so
that the least number
will get them first. That's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did it work in Maine?
Well, that's what I just said. The Republican had 48% on election night, or that when the polls closed. The Democrat with 47%, and the two minor party candidates split 5%. Because the Republican didn't win, 50% plus one, the fourth candidate was thrown out. People who voted for their second choices were redistributed, and the Democrat wound up winning that seat. As
Thomas Alleghi says the voting system has worked from the bargaining. I think you might mean the beginning. Thanks for that comment. So what about the complicate? What if some people say, gee, that's so complicated, Oz, I'm scratching my head. I want to go vote for somebody. What do you got to do counting this up once, then you count it up twice, then you put everything around? Like for nerds like us, it's fun. Is there a concern?
Well, here's a simplistic say. I've been in rooms where somebody will ask the question. Like this Catherine Gale, who's one of the people working with Michael Porter on the analysis of how the system is broken. I was in a room with where she was doing a speech, and she asked people, raise your hand, how many people in the room like your choice of beers? And all the hands went up, and hands stayed up, and said, how many people in the room, leave your hands up if you like the choices you have on coffee? All the hands stood up and said, how many people like the choices you get at the polling booth? And all the heads went. We all can make choices, Paul. I don't think this is anywhere near as complicated as we think it is, and it is pretty straightforward. You literally, to your point earlier, if there are 5 candidates running, you literally put them in rank order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And you can just pick 3 if you want. You pick who you like.
Absolutely.
The idea is you rethink of voting as voting for somebody you'd like to have in office versus someone you least disgusted by.
I mean, you made the comment earlier about voting, and how many times have we heard this in the last several all kinds of elections, national and state? I'm holding my nose when I go into the polls. That's not the way the democratic system is going to work. And one of the things that I think is really important to point out, what's been the impact of this? I would argue that, and you can point lots of things out at the national level, but I would argue at the state level, the gridlock that's occurred as a result of parties being in their silos is that we haven't addressed the unfunded pension liability. We haven't invested in transportation and infrastructure over the last 20 years. We haven't addressed some of the key funding issues for our municipalities. There are a number of issues that I think become hostage to theological arguments of both parties who are candidates more concerned about winning re-election than they are about addressing the issues. And that's the concept that these 3 initiatives that we have underway are looking to address.
All right. So now you mentioned Michael Porter, who's working with a fellow, Harvard Business School person named Catherine Gale. Porter invented the idea of co-opetition, where companies, instead of fighting against each other, kind of work with each other in a way that benefits everybody. Is this tell me about research. I didn't realize he was also looking at ranked choice voting. Is this an extension of that work he did?
I don't know if it's so much of an extension of the co-opetition. What he and Catherine Gale, who's a former executive, I forget which company out in Minnesota, have done, is looked at the impact of our political system on our inability to move forward in a number of key areas. And so when you have fewer people participating in elections, when you have an inability of people to come to the middle to resolve issues, it has a negative impact on not only the current system, but it has it on the longer term system. And that's what they've been studying.
And what would we have to do to have ranked choice voting? Would we need a law or constitution? You need a constitutional amendment?
In Maine, you needed a constitutional amendment. I'm not positive. I believe you need a constitutional amendment in Connecticut as well. It's one of the things that we're taking a hard look at, Paul.
All right. And we're taking a hard look here on Dateline, New Haven. Oz Griebel. We last saw him running for governor as a third-party candidate. Now he's trying to build a third party that's trying to change how the electoral system works. It's called Connecticut SAM. Serve America Movement. It's a 50-state effort. What about the Electoral College? There's a similar movement, I guess similar motivation, where they want to have a compact, since you're not going to eliminate the electoral system easily through constitutional amendments, where states vote and say, after an election, we will honor the popular vote. So even if our state voted for the candidate, if the electoral votes add up like last time in 2016, for a presidential candidate who lost the popular vote, we will vote for the candidate who had the most popular votes, even if they didn't win our state. Are you for that compact?
I haven't. In the issue of why the so-called founding fathers put the Electoral College into me.
Right, they didn't want a tyranny of the more urban areas, right? Correct. They wanted the rural states.
Well, yeah, and I think there's still some validity to to that argument. I'm not an expert on it.
Should a
Paul.
voter in Montana have 5 times as much say in who the president is than a voter in New York?
Well, the concept, obviously, of guaranteeing a representative in the House for every state is there. 2 senators. There is a certain divisiveness to this that I would like. I've not taken the time to further look at it, in detail. I certainly understand the argument of the popular vote, but you start tampering with some things that have worked pretty well over the history of this country. I'm more in the cautious camp on that kind of stuff, Paul, than anything.
When it ain't broke, don't fix it. Term limits. Tell me about that. Why do you guys want term limits?
If you put up, I've said this 1,000 times I've said this to many people. Up until about 5 years ago, I was of the view that it's up to us as voters to determine who stays in office. And over those last, particularly having run now twice, once in 10 for the Republican nomination, and then in 18 with Monty as an independent ticket, you begin to, and having worked in the public policy area for a long time, both when I was at the bank and at the Alliance, you begin to see that there are incentives, in my opinion, there are wrong incentives to stay in office. After all, we did, this country adopted the 24th or 25th Amendment to limit the presidents to serving 2 terms after the four Roosevelt terms. I think there's value in, and you look at what happened in this state when Governor Rowland ran for a 3rd term. Are we being motivated by the wrong things? Is the idea of staying in office in the case of being able to take care, being able to secure health care benefits and the like? Are those the right reasons to be in office?
It's funny, the Tea Party ran for term limits, and then their members, when they got went back on it.
And I think
how many terms would you be looking at?
There are a couple of states that have done this, Paul, and you do things. We haven't played with this with enough detail, but you'd look at something like maybe 12 years in one of the 2 chambers. I think you'd look hard at 2 terms for constitutional offices. These are things that we need to flesh out before we put them in front of.
By 12 years, you mean a combination
of things?
In other words, can you be 6 years as state rep, 6 as senator?
Right. And maybe there are states that allow you to come back after a hiatus and whatnot. I think the other point that I want to make, Paul, on term limits is you're squeezing out, and this to me is particularly true for younger people. Someone staying in office for 20 years. And we all know that incumbency is a very powerful thing. The old adage that your second toughest race is the first one for re-election, and after that, it becomes not automatic, but it becomes a lot easier to run just because of the power of incumbency. I think you begin to squeeze out newer voices as times change, having people who are in their 30s and 40s, not just people in their 60s and 70s, deciding where the state or the city goes, I think is an important element to have as an option.
And with the baby boomers, such a large generation and living healthier, longer lives, it's been harder for young people to be heard.
Correct. And you want to be sure that you engage. I mean, you look at participation in voting. I don't need to tell you that it's woeful in Connecticut. It's woeful in many places
because they don't have choices. So that's another argument for term limits. One argument against term limits you cited, which was your old argument.
Correct.
The voters can do it. If they don't want someone, vote them out. And you're saying incumbency has so much power accrued to itself that you don't really give them the choice to vote them out, and you feel the perverse incentive. So how to behave in office to stay in. The second objection I've heard, not as loud, is that it gives a lot of power to staffers who are up in the Capitol a long time who really know how it works, and to special interests. Let's say ALEC, ALEC, the National Association of Business Groups, that have been writing legislation that you just hand in many of the 50 states to just have them be passed and written in by legislators they voted in because they don't know the system. Does it give less power to the people if institutionalized interests like lobbyists and staffers have so much more knowledge of the building at the Capitol that they'll end up making the laws?
Well, a couple of things I would say, Paul. Number one, I don't agree with this statement, but more importantly, I think there are ways you can address that. For example, you could have staggered terms. In the Senate, one of the things that we've talked about internally is, instead of having the Senate terms be 2 years, should those be 4-year terms, or should they be 6-year terms like they are at the U.S. Senate? Similarly, on the House seats, they could still be 2-year terms, but the election cycle could be staggered, so you didn't lose to your point, institutional knowledge.
And should we be like Nebraska and make it unicameral so we don't have to pay for as many legislators?
I think there's a legitimate question that's out there, Paul. That
does it really work like the national system, which I think has a lot of merit to it for whole states? When you have some people elected more deliberatively for 6 years, looking out for instance for a whole state, and then House seats in the House of Representatives that are closer to the people in smaller districts that might have different interests and get more review by the voters every 2 years. I don't know if in a small state like Connecticut we have that same need for a bicameral legislature.
Oh, I think that look, there are a number of legislators in the past that have raised that issue. Obviously, and
then we could pay them more, and they don't have to.
Well, I think there's the whole idea of looking at your point, Paul, about really looking at the way we're governing ourselves. We're focusing on three things: ranked choice voting, open public primaries, and term limits. Mm-hmm. But you're raising a series of issues that I think are legitimate. That looking at is the governmental structure that we have in place today, that we've had in place, for 100 years, is it the right structure going forward? And to your point, should we have fewer legislators being paid more? I think those are all legitimate questions that need to be debated. That's not our focus, but I think it leads to those kinds of conversations.
And we're starting talking about unrigging the election system with Oz Griebel of Connecticut Sam, Serve American Movement on New Haven Independent, Dateline New Haven, 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. Oz, so
yes,
tell me how you're doing this work. You're the chair of the group in Connecticut. How many people do you have on your group, and how you've been going to private homes, college forums? How are you getting the word out?
We're doing, first of all, this kind of an opportunity, Paul, is invaluable. So thank you again for being here. The opportunity to talk. We're looking to build the number of folks who are on our email base. So I'll plug our website, which is www.joinsamct.org. And if people go to that site, put their email address in, they'll get our periodic updates. And then to reiterate what you just said, we're looking for opportunities to go to homes, businesses, Rotary clubs, to talk about these.
And have you been on the hustings?
Yes, I have been. Yeah, I'm looking for the opportunity. Was down in New Haven here, working with talking to a small business group, informal group that gets together for breakfast once a month. Talking with them. I was at a Rotary club in Essex. I mean, literally, this is a grassroots is probably a oversimplified statement, but this is we will build. We really need for the kind of change that we're talking about here, Paul. You really need a groundswell of voters to say this is important. One of the things that we'll be doing as we turn the corner in the second quarter is putting a scorecard together that voters can have. For the November elections for states, the candidates for state Senate and state House, the state House seats, saying where do you stand, candidate X, on open public primaries, ranked choice voting? Because we plan to be up at the Capitol in January of 2021, saying we want these changes.
And how many people are in the group in the chapter in Connecticut?
Oh, it's the number of email addresses we have is probably about 700 or 800, Paul. At this point,
so
we're looking to build that as we go.
You need two, right? Two people with a powerful idea can change the world.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. Any memorable interactions you've had so far on the hustings of this?
The positive thing I'd say, Paul, is we get very positive reaction to this. I mean, people are interested in this. As I said a minute ago, this is I was out at a meeting in Denver last month with about 25 organizations from around the country that are involved in one or more of these type of initiatives. People from Maine, people from Massachusetts, people from Colorado, California, that are looking at everything from the gerrymandering question and redistricting to the issues we're talking about here. And the sense of energy is palpable. People want the number of people who want to see constructive change to give themselves more choice, more voice, and as I say, more action has been very positive.
Excellent. And now, you have any candidate you like for 2020 president?
I'm staying on script here, Paul.
All right, Oz, good job. All right. Well, the script is, folks, ready for the website? JoinSamConnecticut.org. JoinSMCT.org. We'll have an article based on this show where we'll have the link to it. So I want to thank you for joining us, Oz Griebel. Love when you come into WNHH.
It's always a pleasure, Paul. I enjoy myself immensely. I salute what you do here.
All right, and right back at you. Thanks for the listeners and people writing in questions. Thanks to the miracle man behind the controls, WNHH station manager Harry Droz. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free. from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night at WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.